Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear subject. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I'm fantastic as always. This week we're tackling something that I hear a lot about around the flight school, and we've had a lot of it in the last couple of months in Houston, Texas. We're going to talk weather, and we're going to share some resources, some stories, and some information that's going to help you. Pat Brown joins us again on the show. Welcome, Pat.
Thanks. Hey, Bobby. Hey, Wally.
So Pat and Wally did their recurrent DPE training today, and they feel renewed and refreshed. They said it was the most
worn out,
exciting day of their life, and we'll leave it at that. But Wally, we talk, man, and I was joking on them. It's the prettiest day ever in Houston, Texas, and we haven't had any luck for check rides in the last 6 weeks. I think every day we've done a check ride with these two guys, we've had bad weather. And here they have recurrent training, no check rides, and the weather is clear to 1 million and not a lick of wind out there today.
Yeah, I know for a fact there were a couple of the Houston DPs who were in the class today. And as I was driving in, I was thinking, well, there's about 8 lost check rides today.
Easy.
We're all on a Zoom call.
Yeah, that's disappointing. You would almost wish that the FAA could get that right and only schedule that on a bad weather day. But, boy, we nailed it for a good weather day. Pat, I've heard your name a million times right before or after the word weather because I think people on check rides with you have struggled or stumbled, and they call Pat the weatherman, the weather DPE. I think there's obviously a lot of weather we deal with in aviation, and I don't remember where exactly I became fond or knowledgeable about the weather, but I have an app called Windy on my home screen. I look at Windy every day. I know what the pressures are going to be. I always know the direction of the wind coming. Looking at y'all's scheduled check rides, I'm looking at weather days in advance. But somewhere private, solo, cross-country, I started getting a little smart. But I remember feeling like a pilot somewhere in my instrument days where I started coming to the flight school and I stopped asking, are we going to fly today? And I started saying, we are going to fly today. Or I would say, we're not going to fly today. I was making that weather call. Right. And I think we talk a lot about it, Wally, where people don't have that sense of decision making very much in training because the instructor's always doing it, right?
Yeah, right.
Let's just talk weather in general. What did we? The ACS calls out some specific things that people must know as their private applicants. What are those things that we need to know as private applicants?
Well, I've got the ACS in front of me, so we might as well talk about that. If you look at the knowledge elements, there's, 10 or 12 of them, I guess. Sources of weather data like the National Weather Service, acceptable weather products, meteorology applicable to the departure and route, alternate and destinations under VFR conditions, atmospheric composition and stability, wind, temperature, moisture, precipitation, weather systems, clouds, turbulence, thunderstorms and microbursts, icing and freezing levels, fog, mist, frost, obstructions to visibility, and flight deck displays of digital weather and aeronautical information. This is all in the knowledge area of the ACS.
For a private pilot applicant.
And, as probably anybody that listens to this knows or will learn at some point, we're supposed to test at least one element in the knowledge list, one element in the risk list, and all of the skills. And so one kind of, I guess, leads to another. If I ask somebody about a temperature and dew point issue and they stumble on that, well, I've kind of need to ask maybe something a little bit more. And I guess I have kind of gotten the reputation, at least, about being the guy that, that hones in on weather. But there are a couple of DPs that I know that weight and balance is a big deal for them. And so I think all of us have,
your thing,
little things that we think are kind of important. Well, Wally, I don't know what yours are.
Electrical systems.
Oh, yeah.
You're Mr. Electrical System?
Yeah.
So, but I guess I have tended to hone in a little bit more on this is because that's what we're flying in.
Yep.
You know, we're flying in this ocean of air where we have currents just like we have in the ocean. And but unlike the ocean, this stuff can change at the snap of a finger. Let's say that we have a close temperature and dew point. Let's say they're right on top of each other. It could be clear and beautiful outside, just like it is right now. And just because the temperature and dew point is right on top of each other doesn't mean there will be fog out there. What it means is there is potential for fog, and all it takes is one little trigger of something, and all of a sudden, boom, your ceilings are down on the ground.
We've all been around in the mornings this time of year specifically where it's crystal clear outside. You're drinking your first cup of coffee. You turn around, check what's on the TV, the news, the whatever, newspaper. You turn around, look outside, and it's like fog everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? That's that moment in time where the temperature and the dew point come together, and that layer is just immense everywhere. And I think a lot of students, we have a pretty strong temperature dew point spread for solos. And it's not just visibility, it's also carb ice. They don't understand that those two things create the relative humidity number in the air. And to be honest, I didn't know that either back when I was a brand new pilot. But those two things create the potential for a lot of bad.
If you do a Google search on carburetor ice, there's a really cool chart and colorful type of a chart. And I think most pilots would be amazed at the wide temperature variation from high to low where you can get carb ice.
Oh, no question.
At a temperatures you wouldn't think you would get carb ice, but if you have the right temperature and humidity combination, almost regardless of what the temperature is, you can get carb ice.
Yeah, and that's a very dangerous thing. And our temperature dew point spread is more about carb ice than it is visibility.
Yeah.
But I've flown before where the temperature dew point spread on the ground was about 4 degrees Celsius, and then we're flying at about 2,000 feet, and you almost feel like you're in the clouds because you're looking through 100 miles of it. Now from the ground, you're only looking through 50 feet of it, and it looks like the skies are still pretty clear. But that would be a scary proposition if I was a student pilot flying in that kind of weather as well. Right. So pretty much the ACS says you need to know everything there is about weather, and that's tough. I can remember struggling with METARs and TAFs and the breaking it down. I think students just need to study that stuff and know it, right? You need to be able to read it. Sure, there's a million ways to get it interpreted or broken out for you. ForeFlight is both the enemy of good and bad nowadays. I think everything reads in plain English, which is helpful, but I think you should still know those fundamentals. What are we talking about in y'all's real world scenarios that they need to understand all the stuff that's in a METAR and a TAF? And then more importantly, we talk TAF all the time, Pat, when we're trying to talk check rides, because we know that that's really going to be accurate.
Right.
And this airport doesn't have a TAF. And when someone tells me, well, you can't use that TAF, I mean, come on. We're like 3 miles outside of that. I'm pretty sure the forecast is going to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
But what are y'all expecting people to know, applicants to understand as it relates to the METARs and TAFs and all the rules and boundaries of those things?
Well, I apply it to the cross country that I give them. So we're going to go from airport A to airport B. And I ask, how is the weather for our flight today? Could we make the flight? And, it's either yes, no, or a maybe. And then we'll start talking about what the weather is at our departure airport. How is it? We'll look at the weather at the arrival airport, the destination airport, and then we'll start looking in between. And if you look at the big picture weather charts, you can get a pretty good idea of what the weather is. If you know where the frontal activity is, that sort of stuff, you'll have a fairly good idea of, if the weather here is good and the weather at your destination is good, that's 150 miles away, and there's no real frontal activity, probably the weather in between is going to be pretty good. And so then I'll say, okay, let's say we're flying along, and we've we have to use the restroom. Both of us have to use the restroom really bad, so we're going to divert. So I will then give them an airport about halfway between here and our destination, and I'll say, okay, let's concentrate on that airport. Let's take a look at the weather there. Let's take a look at the winds. What runway would we expect to use? I like to pick an uncontrolled airport where they would have to pick the runway, and then we'll start talking about crosswinds. So I try to kind of incorporate it all together. But the other thing I like to do is I like to ask, how's the weather outside? And I like to see where their eyes go, especially, if I'm in a room that has a window, because I like them to look outside. And, they can look outside. Well, it looks pretty good. Okay, yeah, it does. Well, let's dive deeper. Just like someone who comes up to me and says, how are you feeling? I could say, I feel good. I don't need to take my blood pressure, take my pulse, check my temperature to tell you how I'm feeling. I know how I'm feeling.
Sure.
So, kind of apply that to the weather. Gee, when I walked in this morning, man, it was windy. Or, boy, it was cold. Or, it was really foggy on the road today. Well, it's probably foggy on the runway then.
Yeah.
So,
I've also had those days I wear shorts almost every day to work because I like to wear shorts. I've come here when it was 60 degrees, and then I left and I was freezing my tail off, right? Like, I wish I had a coat.
Right.
I mean, and that's me just not planning. Of course, that information was known. Everyone probably was predicting that. That's not a surprise. I do think as a kid, though, I probably thought, where did this come from, right? But nowadays we know it's coming, right? Yeah. How in your conversations, Pat, with applicants, do you incorporate these weather questions, or how do you get that ball going?
It's somewhat similar to what Wally does, but we're two different people. We do things slightly differently. I'll typically ask kind of an open-ended question. Say, how did you determine that the weather was suitable for the flight today, or unsuitable? And I would say 8 times out of 10, the first answer will be, well, I checked the METARs and the TAFs. Okay. What else? I looked on ForeFlight. Okay, what did you find on ForeFlight? I got the METARs and the TAFs. So where do the METARs and the TAFs come from? Well, airports. Okay, well, how about all these pretty pictures that ForeFlight puts up there? Where do they get that information? Airports, I'm hoping they'll say the National Weather Service, because that's where it all comes from eventually through Leidos with ForeFlight, but ultimately it all comes from the National Weather Service, and so finally I'll say, okay, well, you've told me you look at the METAR, you look at the TAF, and sometimes they say I call flight service. Sometimes they'll say I looked in ForeFlight, and this is what I got.
With the charts and real
the
data.
charts and stuff. And I'll say, okay, well, that's great. So mechanically, you're telling what you did, which is great. But there's a tremendous amount of information there. How did you use that information? What is your process by which you determined that we can make this flight today? Not just I checked the TAF, I checked the METARs, I looked at the pretty pictures on ForeFlight, but how did you use that information? What are those pretty pictures on ForeFlight telling you? All the 20 different pages of weather briefings or whatever it is on ForeFlight that you can get. What is all that telling you? And how can you use that to formulate a good go, no-go decision? And that, for me, that will typically lead to pulling out a kind of a generic surface analysis chart and kind of just drawing a line on it from point A to point B, which invariably will take us through a couple of different fronts or weather systems, and then kind of, we're crossing this boundary here. What is that? And, that's a low pressure front. Oh, that's no such thing. It's a warm front in this particular case, or it's a high pressure front. Again, no such thing. So I find a couple of things. I find that the understanding of just basic symbology on a simple surface analysis chart is lacking.
And you're not talking like every little icon. You're just talking big picture here.
No,
right?
I'm talking about big picture. If somebody walks into one of my check rides and can tell me, and again, I'm talking about broad strokes, generally speaking, what are the characteristics? Well, first of all, what is that front? That's a warm front. Okay, well, tell me kind of some of the characteristics of a warm front and what kind of flying conditions we could expect if we were to encounter one. So if they can tell me that, and the same thing with a cold front and maybe an occluded front and a stationary front, and tell me some of the characteristics of those big H's that you see on the map and the L's and troughs, the little dash lines or troughs, and occasionally you'll see a dry line. If I see a dry line on a surface analysis chart I'm looking at, I'll circle that and say, well, what do you think that is? But I think we were talking before you hit the record button, I think there's only maybe 8 symbols or something that generally will appear on a surface analysis chart. Highs, lows, the various fronts, a trough, the dry line, 6 or 8 items. And if you can just kind of tell me the general characteristics of those things, I might say, depending on the surface analysis chart I'm looking at, if there's something obvious, I might say, where do you think the strongest winds are? Well, if they know that the stronger winds are typically with the isobars are close together, and they can say, well, right there where those isobars are. For the most part, my questioning on weather is over.
Right.
I do want them to be able to decode a METAR and a TAF, not look at it plain language, and I'll tell you the reason why. Besides the fact that it's frankly it's easier to do that if you get pretty good at it. It's really just easier to do. But depending on what flight planner you're looking at, and I like 1-800-WXBrief.com as a flight planner, because if you put your route in there and hit submit, you get a split screen on the right-hand side. You get your route with greens, reds, or blue or purple dots or whatever, and of course green is good. Red is bad, magenta is worse. But on the left side of the screen, if you choose METARs, all these METARs along the route line up. And because of the way they're formatted, all the temperature and dew points generally line up. And literally at the snap of a finger, you can tell that at least right now, it's either stable or it's converging or it's diverging, or what the spread is, you can tell what the cloud deck is likely to be at just by looking at the temperature and dew point spread. Same thing with TAFs. If you click on forecast and TAF, you get that split screen. And again, because the format is the same, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes the sky conditions, sky clear, overcast, this or that, are all right there lined up. And again, just with the snap of a finger, you can discern right now what the trend is for the next 4, 5, 6 hours, whatever the case may be, before the next TAF comes out. So knowing how to read coded weather for me is awfully important.
Yeah, I can't disagree. I'm with you. I think maybe I don't know every acronym that could be at the latter half of that.
But you don't have to.
But I can definitely tell you the winds, the direction, the what the ceiling probably is, and what I expect to be the day like. And I joke windy similarly. I can glance at the chart on windy, and it's a color bar and a windsock and some numbers, right? But I can tell you whether we're going to be a busy day or not a busy day just by that quick glance.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing I think you're saying about being able to decode that stuff. You're able to really depict whether you should go or shouldn't go, or maybe I need to think about this one a little bit more too. Well,
and before you hit record, Wally, you were talking about the, especially the weather where you live.
Yeah. We live in Houston. We live in a sort of inland coastal community. I don't know, what are we, 70 miles from the Gulf of Mexico?
About that.
But the prevailing winds around here are from the south, and I know walking out of my house, if it feels unseasonably cool, whether it's wintertime or July, it doesn't matter. But if it just feels cooler than it normally is, I know the winds are probably out of the north. Mm-hmm. And I know whatever airport I'm going to, we're going to be taking off and landing north, which it's a little bit of an eye roller because the way the airports are configured around here, things flow a lot better if we're landing south.
I was going to say, you're already frustrated that it's going to be a longer day because you're going to have to fly other places to shoot approaches.
But I'm already thinking, as I'm driving here, I'm thinking, okay, this is an instrument check ride. I need to get that ILS in. Mm-hmm. If this is a non-WAS airplane, I'm going to have to go to College Station to get that ILS, and it's a WAS airplane. I can do a GPS, but I'm thinking along those lines. I remember taking a weather class in college, and basically the first half of the semester was kind of on theory. The second half of the semester was reading all the charts and reading, the METARs, and they weren't called METARs back then, but it was the same thing.
Well, sequence reports.
Yeah. I was trying to remember what it was called, but it's been a
We're
long
from
time.
the same era.
Right. But I remember sitting there thinking, let's just get to the charts. I don't need to know this theory stuff.
Yeah.
But now I realize how much I use it. Just unseasonably cold in Houston, probably the winds are out of the north. It's probably going to be high ceilings. Probably the air is not moist. It's just things like that. I think it's important to know your local weather, what it's like. If you live up on the Great Lakes, probably if the wind is coming from one of the lakes, it's probably bad weather.
Yep.
I don't know, but I'm just guessing.
Well, down here, let's just pick a month, July. You walk outside and the air is so thick you wear it.
Yeah.
And you can just be absolutely certain, or pretty darn certain, that by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon we're going to have a thunderstorm.
No question.
If you're living in Florida, at 3 o'clock every afternoon, you are going to have a thunderstorm.
Yeah.
Well, you can fly around the towers of showers around here in the month of June and July as well, right?
Yeah.
Because it's pockets of it, but it gets together and it dumps the water out.
Yeah, I spent some time out on Guam, and I know a standard day in Guam was partly cloudy skies, wind 060 at 15, gusting to 25. Temperature was 75 degrees Fahrenheit if it was raining. It was 85 if it was not raining. And it was the standard altimeter 3030. That was just what it is.
That's pretty good weather.
Yeah.
I like Guam.
Yeah.
So we talked ACS. What other resources would you point people to? There used to be a whole bunch of ACSs or AC circulars, advisory circulars we were going to talk about, but those have all kind of formulated into the aviation handbook. We've talked about some cool handbooks on this show, but there's an entire book dedicated to all this. I can remember talking to my instructor. He wanted a weather book, and he couldn't afford it or something. I don't remember, but I bought this weather book for him, and I'm like, are you going to read that or skim that? He's like, I'm going to read it. And I was like, man, that doesn't seem very enjoyable. He's a professional captain somewhere today, and I'm not. But I do think that there's a big aspect of figuring out how you like to learn and learning. What are some of the resources y'all would point people to, if anything, that I haven't mentioned?
I think everybody does, learn a little bit differently. But there are so many resources out there. I wouldn't even begin to know what to point people at. So much of, the old days of watching the weatherman on the 10 o'clock news, I think are long gone. But
if people don't know it, that's just an actor saying whatever they've been told to say. There's maybe a little bit of meteorology in there, but if they ever did a day where it wasn't like going to be bad weather, I'd be shocked, right? Even on clear days, you would think that the weather's going to be bad.
I understand that, but I would differ with you just a little bit on that, Wally, and I would say start watching the weather at night. Maybe pull up a surface analysis chart on your own from the National Weather Service.
No, that's good advice there.
And just have it right there in front of you, and see if you can guess what it is the weather person is going to say about the weather around the country today. I think if you just start with something like that, I mean, frankly, when I'm planning, we're going to Sun and Fun in a couple of weeks. About a week in advance, I'm going to start watching the news. The Weather Channel a little bit more than I do right now. I just want to get a kind of an idea of the bigger picture, and then I'm just going to go to weather.com, and I'm just going to start picking out the 10-day forecast and picking out about 4 or 5 points along our way, and see what the 10-day is. And of course, the closer you get to the actual day, the more accurate it tends to be. So when I'm 3 days out, I'll still look at the 10-day weather because it's all relative. Yeah, okay, well, that's not too bad. And then as we get about 2 days out, I'll look at the MOS, various places, because that goes out 3 days. TAFs don't. And oftentimes the moss is pretty accurate. I won't bet my life on it, but oftentimes it's reasonably accurate. Of course, the day before, I'm starting to look at the progs maybe, but certainly the TAFs, and probably the night before I'll actually call a briefer. But that's but I start with just the regular TV weather person and see what that big picture is.
Yeah, I like to add additional resources while you're doing that. I think I can remember, again, as I matured in my weather knowledge, never knowing that they really talked about the temperature dew point on every daily forecast. But there's so much information, especially here, as humid as it gets, how much information there is in those two pieces of information. All right.
I'll tell just a funny story about a local weather guy. We used to have a weather man here in Houston named Neil Frank.
Oh yeah,
and
Mr.
Neil
Hurricane.
was at one point, he was the director of the National Hurricane Center down in Florida, and he came to Houston and was the weatherman for the CBS affiliate here in Houston. And he was really a bit of a folk hero here in Houston. I mean, he had this signature crew cut, and he was a star in Houston, Texas. But anyway, I was walking through the airport one day with another pilot, and I don't remember where we were going, but I saw Neil walking through the airport, Neil Frank. And I pointed out to the guy I was flying with, his name is Bill Bella, if he happens to listen. I say, "Hey, Bill, isn't that Neil Frank?" And he goes, "Yeah, it is." Well, let me back up. At the time, we used to go to this room that we called the weather room to get our flight plan and basically get our weather, and then we'd go to the airplane. Well, anyway, so I said, "Bill, isn't that Neil Frank over there?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he yells across the airport. He goes, "Hey, Neil!" And Neil looked over at us, and Bill goes, "How's the weather?" And Neil gave us a thumbs up, and Bill said to me, "Well, we don't need to go to the weather room. Let's just go straight to the airplane."
If Neil Frank says it's good, it's going to be good.
Yeah.
So let's talk the flip side of that. Let's tell a couple stories as we wrap up. Bad weather stories, maybe good weather stories, flying, our weather stories. I told y'all right before I hit record, I don't think my wife will ever fly with me again in IMC because we did an Austin trip one night to go see our daughter, and it was cloudy and it was probably more broken, but we were in and out of the clouds at about 6,000 feet. Pitch black outside. You couldn't see it coming, but when it got there, you could feel the bumping, and I had the strobe lights on, and it felt like we were in the Exorcist TV show where there was somebody on the plane wing. But I was a mistake probably on my part to let her experience that way. What's a story that sticks with you that makes you think about the weather, Wally?
Well, I think every time that I can honestly say I've been scared in an airplane, weather has been a factor. Whether it be thunderstorm flying freight at night, and we had a mentality of, well, we got weather radar, we can go, and that was kind of the young cocky attitude that we freight pilots had. And I'll never forget flying one night from Monroe to Dallas, Fort Worth, and going through the weather, and a lot of times people would go with me. And this night, nobody went with me, and I truly remember thinking it was a blessing that nobody was with me, because it would be a shame for two people to die.
Wow.
Because I really thought that there was a really good chance that I wasn't going to make it through. And then on top of that, this just shows you how stupid I was. I landed, and I got back in, and I flew back through it. It wasn't as bad on the way back, but on the way back, I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, You're just a total idiot here. But I remember that night, and I just remember there were a couple times where ceilings were lower than they were supposed to be. When I say supposed to be, lower than forecast, and coming in, and you're expecting to pop out of the clouds at 900 feet, and you don't, and they're 700 feet, 600, 500, and I can remember the blood pressure going up.
Yeah.
And it's not a good feeling.
Pat, do you have a weather story that sticks with you?
Well, the one that you talking about what you taught reminded me of one, but before we were hit record, I had said something about a different one. So I'll tell you the one. I hadn't been instructing, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years, so fairly green. And we were flying back, VFR day, flying back from Brenham. And for those that don't know, Brenham is about 45 miles west, a little bit north of where we are right now in the hill country. And I was with a student, private pilot student, if I remember right. Anyway, he had gotten a briefing, and there were thunderstorms about halfway between Beaumont and Houston. So that would put them about, I don't know, what would you say, Wally? Probably 80 miles from Brenham, something like that, somewhere like that. And, they had been blowing up all day long, and they were dissipating at that point. And that was what he told what the briefer told my student, and warned him about something called an outflow boundary. I'm a CFI, I should know what that is, but I didn't have a clue. All right, let's just we'll go back to Houston. Clear and beautiful. We're flying along. It's relatively calm and smooth outside, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I see some dust on a field out in front of us. It looked like a farmer's field, and like maybe there's a combine or something, harvesting corn or something like that, and kicking up some dust. I didn't think twice about it. And about 5 seconds later, bam, we get hit. I don't know by what, and the airplane goes almost inverted. Almost, wow. It was a Warrior, almost inverted. We invented curse words at that point. He was able to his credit, he was able to right the ship, and we were just getting beat to heck. And I told him turn around, and we went back the other way and got into smooth air. So both of us looking at each other. What was that? Don't know. So we fly south for a little bit. It's okay. Well, let's go turn back east and head to Houston. Again, about 5 minutes later, we get hit. Bam! Again, the same thing. Not quite inverted this time, but there was stuff flying all over the cockpit. And again, turn south and get away from it. We actually ended up landing at a neighborhood airport, walking to a restaurant and having dinner and waiting until dark to go home. And it was a smooth flight. And in doing some research, I found out that was the outflow boundary that they were talking about. It was we always talk about the microbursts coming out of the bottom of a thunderstorm. 6,000 feet per minute is, what you typically hear. Stay 20 miles away from thunderstorms because you don't want to get the hail and you don't want to get the downbursts and the wind shear and things like that. But I'd never heard the term outflow boundary. You stop to think about where all that wind goes when it hits the ground. It bounces and it goes out in an outflow boundary, or a gust front. That's another term for it. Same thing. And that's when I learned that if you believe that 20 miles is far enough to be away from a dissipating thunderstorm, you are an inviting tragedy.
Yes.
So now, in our case, these were really, really severe thunderstorms, and there were a lot of them. But, boy, I'll tell you what, I have given thunderstorms a whole lot wider berth than just 20 miles since then.
Yeah, unlike Wally, I don't have to fly anywhere I want to. So my perimeter or diameter from the middle of a thunderstorm is much larger than most, I'm sure. But yeah. I bet there's a million stories out there where we've all learned a little something. Oh, yeah. Take heed to that. That's why there's so much information about weather. Yeah. That's why every ACS talks about the weather knowledge you're supposed to have as a pilot. And you probably don't want to make your wife mad either if you want to have fun flying. So do the right thing. And as always, thanks for listening and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.